So as mentioned, my name's Adam Green. I lead our programmatic business that we call Reach. And like Jean, I wanted to start by saying thank you to Holland. You guys, as Jean mentioned, really are leading the way. When we went through our platform the last first year of trading, we noted that pretty much every substantial first for our platform happened here. And that got us asking, what is it that makes the Netherlands such a sophisticated market on both the buy and the sell side? Is it that you're smarter? Is it that you're smaller and everyone knows each other? Is it that you're just somehow intrinsically better? And then we realize, does that even really matter? You just are, and we don't necessarily need to care about how. But thank you for doing it. I just want to say we've been really thrilled to have a market like Holland that is willing to try things and to push things further. And that got us onto another question, which was, how do we stay number one? How do we keep this really interesting sort of melting pot of programmatic best practices as the best market in the world? And we have a bunch of ideas on how that can happen, things that we think are going to come next. But first and foremost among them is one word: open. You're going to hear a lot from me today and us throughout the rest of the year about a ton of things, from creative optimization and dynamic creative to audience data, to the way that you cache creative. But a lot of it is underpinned by this one notion of an open auction. And only by moving more of our inventory and eventually substantial amounts of our inventory to an open auction will programmatic see the benefits that it sort of promised as an idea in the first place. Before I dive into the rest of this, I want to take a quick audience survey. How many of you come from a media owner or publisher side? Okay, looks like 2/3 of the room. How about from the buy side, like an agency or... Okay, a few people. And then tech providers who might sit somewhere in the middle. None of the Broadsign people put up their hands. I find that very concerning. That is what we do, guys. Okay, great. So this presentation has sort of something for each side, but a lot of it is geared towards the media owner publisher side. So right now, in Holland and frankly around the world, we're still transacting mostly in private marketplaces or private deals with a single buyer. And we call this programmanual. It's a great way to operate. It brings a lot of security on both sides. As a seller, you know exactly how much you're selling something for. As a buyer, you generally know exactly the kind of inventory that you're being promised and that you're buying. And so it's great in that security side of the yield optimizer's dilemma. So Mungo talked a little bit about this, the difficulty of trying to optimize your inventory and sell it for the most. And you're always trading price for security in that exercise. You can have a great security and you know exactly what you sell, but maybe you could have got a better price for it if you'd been a little more liquid and a little bit more open with it. And so right now we're trading in a way that is very heavily skewed towards the security side. And so it has a lot of downsides, but three in particular that I want to talk about. Number one is that there's almost no labor efficiency. Sales still has to touch pretty much every deal and pre-negotiate a price. Ad ops still has to set up every deal and traffic every deal. And one of the central value propositions of programmatic and automation is that you get labor efficiency across your campaigns. You can do the same amount with less people, or ideally do more with the same people. So that's one downside. The other is that there's no opportunity to deliver serendipity. And so this idea of buyers stumbling across your inventory as they're trying to fulfill a campaign and saying, oh, I didn't know that there were trains in the Utrecht, screens in the Utrecht train station that I could buy. I didn't know that there was such a millennial audience in this particular town square. Maybe I'd like to buy it. There's no opportunity to do that. So new buyers serendipitously finding you. Similarly, there's much less, in fact, almost no opportunity for a buyer to stumble across the audience that they're looking for. And this is one of the benefits that programmatic also promises. Very difficult to do without open auctions. And then the last one is that there's no price synergy. And this is one of the most important value propositions of programmatic, is that the pricing is supposed to be a little bit more liquid. And Mungo talked a lot about how do you come up with the price for inventory. Ultimately, when you're going through that exercise, you're coming up with a price based on a whole bunch of factors. The true price of anything, doesn't matter whether it's ad inventory or cars or houses, is whatever the market will bear. Whatever someone is willing to pay, that's the price of that thing. You can do a lot of work to come up with a price that you think is fair. You should start with that as your floor price and then let the market determine what they want to pay. And this delivers two really nice things, different to each side. For a publisher, it delivers or a media owner, it delivers the promise that you might get a bidding war started on some of your inventory. Two buyers saying, no, I really want that set of impressions. I really want that location at noon. No, I really want it at noon. Well, I'll pay some. Well, I'll pay more. Well, I'll pay even more. And eventually you get buoying CPMs. Conversely, on the advertiser side, there's the chance to find cold places in the auction where there aren't as many people bidding, and you can find inventory and impressions that you really need, audiences that you really need, for a lower price than you otherwise would. And there's no way to do that, or much less of a way to do that, without open deals. And so that's what we like to see more of, and we will see hear a lot of talk from us over the course of the next year about the push towards open. And I think if there's any market in the world that can start doing materially more open transactions, it's going to be the Netherlands. Now, for a lot of people, that kind of sounds terrifying. It conjures up images of the stock market, this wildly volatile, crazy place where every bidder sees every bid request, and everybody trades security for price. And everybody's putting all of their inventory out there, and you have no idea what it's going to sell for. And that's not necessarily a good thing for buyers or for sellers, right? There are some buyers who really need security. They really need to know that they're going to get that specific location at that time of day. Some of the different use cases that Mungo was talking about. And on the publisher side, that kind of price volatility isn't always desirable, particularly if you have revenue shares with landlords and locations where they've come to expect a certain amount per month. Volatility might not be a great thing. And this idea, this stock market analogy of like a full open market, the agora where everybody sees every price and every bid, we think is kind of incomplete and inaccurate, even though it's the most common way, common analogy that people use to describe programmatic trading. If you go to like 1,000 cocktail parties where people are talking about programmatic, your social life has a problem, and you should go to better parties. But if you did for some reason, that analogy, the stock market analogy, is probably the #1 analogy that you would hear. But I've actually never, so in a decade of doing this, I have never seen anyone operate in an entirely open manner. You could, it confers some really nice labor efficiency advantages. You could operate like your whole organization with like one ad ops guy and no sales teams, but in reality, you probably do a lot worse than someone who takes a different approach. There's a reason you guys have professional salespeople out there selling your inventory. Instead, we like to think of programmatic as an auction house. Right, so we are your auction house. The SSP builds the house, we run it and maintain it, and you show up with your inventory in order to sell it. So what might this look like? Just walk with me a little bit on this analogy. Let's say you had some really, really valuable inventory. I know all of you guys have great inventory, and let's say it's akin to art. So let's say you were selling a painting. Like this one, this is allegedly Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi. It's the most expensive painting ever sold at auction, $450 million. And it was bought 10 months earlier by a couple of guys at a New Orleans junk sale for $10,000. So we're all in the wrong business. But if you were gonna sell this, you would probably take it to an auction house, right, in order to do it. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. They took it to Christie's auction house, and Christie's helps them validate the price, and they are able to bring together a whole bunch of qualified buyers in one place in the hopes that you could get a bidding war started, as to be the first buyer who could buy a Da Vinci painting that goes up for sale in quite some time, and that's exactly what happened. But there's an interesting thing about auction houses. There's a reason they don't call them auction halls. Right? Most people, when you think of an auction house, you think of a scene like this, right? Like hundreds of people sitting there, like somehow bidding either by holding up a sign or like scratching their nose or something. You have an auctioneer standing here talking even faster than I am now and pointing at people and saying, going once, going twice, sold to the guy in the blue shirt. But auction houses aren't auction halls. They're houses, and they have a lot of rooms, and they do a lot more things than just run big open auctions, because As a regular seller, whether you're an art seller or an ad inventory seller, you might have some regular buyers, people that you want to talk to on a frequent basis, guys like this. Anyone know who this is, incidentally? So this is a guy, his name is Eli Broad. He's the 65th richest person in the world, the only person to ever start 2 Fortune 500 companies. Elon Musk is gunning for him right now. He also happens to be the world's largest private art collector. He's a very discerning guy, and the kind of guy who might say to you as a regular seller, look, I'll buy from you, but I don't want to be out on the auction floor. I don't want other people knowing what I bid for stuff. That's not really how I operate. I don't want, I have competitors, other billionaires with too much money who might see what I'm willing to spend on something. So I'll guarantee you that I'll buy certain amounts of your inventory, but I don't want to do it on the open floor. I want to do it privately, and that's why auction houses are houses. They have these notions of private rooms. These are like the private deals that we're currently trading for right now, or trading with right now, but everybody's only using private deals. They're not using an open auction. And so you may have one of these rooms where you tell Eli, okay, look, we're going to be bringing up something really special for sale, and you can take a look at it in the private room. You can do that with your ad inventory too. You can take it to a buyer and say, all right, before I put this out on the open floor, I'll give you first look at it. And that has some really, really interesting consequences. So you can take those private deals and you can actually order them in sequence rather. So you can have not just one private room, but you might have like a dozen. And you might say, okay, for the right to take first look at my inventory, you either have to pay a premium above my floor CPM and say, all right, I'll give you first look, but you got to pay a 20% premium or 50% premium. Or you could say, you're going to pay my normal market rate, but you got to guarantee me you're going to spend $1 million a year, right? And then I'll give you first look at it. And then it might say, okay, well, Frank didn't buy it, so I'm going to take it and I'm going to give it to Mungo, and he's going to be the second room that I take it into. And if he buys it, great. That painting never hits the open auction floor. But if he doesn't buy it, maybe I'll take it to the open auction and then see if I can get a price for it amongst a huge number of buyers. And let's say nobody takes it in the giant open auction. Then I might have a last deal. Somebody like Frankie might come to me and say, look, if you have anything you haven't sold, right? Nobody wants it. I'll buy it, but I want a really steep discount. I might say, okay, yeah, that's cool. And then I have this sort of backstop that if I don't sell something in the open auction, I don't need to lower my price. I can just take it surreptitiously to Frankie and sell it to him when no one else knows about it. And that prevents me from eroding my prices in the open auction. Hopefully it doesn't happen very often. But it allows me to buoy my prices. And this idea of stacking deals on top of one another with deal priority, and I think Frankie showed you the deal priority in Reach, is something that we call the waterfall. And waterfall management is a hugely valuable tool for a yield manager as they determine, okay, how can I take this set of inventory that I've got, which might not be changing, and optimize the value that I can wring out of it for my company, stacking these deals on top of one another. And what I love about it, as a guy who's spent quite a while cooking up different use cases using some of these tools, is that it gives your sales teams new things to sell without ever having to change your inventory. Same screen, same network, same deployed footprint, arguably same audience, but a whole new thing that they can sell. This construct, this idea of being the first to take a look at a piece of inventory or the last to take a look at a piece of inventory is something that you can't sell elsewhere or you can't implement elsewhere and allows you to sell things that you could never otherwise do. So what might that look like? So let's say you have IBM, all right? And IBM wants to advertise towards business customers in office buildings. And pretend for a moment that you are a network that has office buildings in your network. So IBM wants office buildings, but they don't really want every office building because not every office building has potential IBM customers in it. Just a few of them do. So they say, okay, I need to advertise in just the buildings where my customers are. That's a lot of office buildings. It's a long time to pick and choose which ones, and they might change. So instead of having to manually do it, they might be able to plug their DSP into their CRM system and download all of the locations of their their prospects, of their leads, out of their CRM system into their DSP and say, look, you just give me all of your office buildings, and then my DSP will choose which ones of them it wants to buy. Right? All of a sudden, you have a really efficient way to sell a very targeted buy to IBM. You could actually go one step further, and the IBM team could say, I actually don't want to advertise in those office buildings all the time. Right? My sales team, they're going in on different days, different months, different times of the year. What I really need is to be able to heavy up in the office buildings where my sales team is going in the 2 weeks before they go in for a meeting. That would be a campaign that would be impossible to plan manually and to deliver in traffic manually. But if you've given them first look deal at all of your office inventory, they can then have their DSP automatically schedule a campaign based on when their sales team books a meeting in their CRM system. So sales team books a meeting, says, okay, I as an individual sales guy am going into this office building in Rotterdam tomorrow or in 2 weeks, and the system automatically starts a campaign in the elevators of that building so that when I go in 2 weeks, my clients, all they've seen for 2 weeks is IBM ads. And so when I show up, I'm the first thing in their mind. Right? You can enable use cases like that were never possible manually, or if they were possible, you'd need like an army of monkeys on typewriters in order to be able to pull them off. Another use case that we've started to see increasingly is using out of home as an extension to social campaigns. And so one of the interesting things about social is that people are out there and they're using it all the time, and it has great rich reporting coming out of like Instagram and Twitter and when you run campaigns on these kinds of platforms, which is fantastic. And the users, for the most part, just scroll past the ads mindlessly. So it's great for getting like good reach on a targeted audience, but not so great for impact of that audience because people are apt to just ignore the ads. So we've seen is people saying, okay, I want to use my social campaign first as a vehicle to reach people, but also as a signal as to where those people are at any given moment, and then I will use those signals coming out of my social platform as triggers to buy those locations in out of home. So the analogy that we were discussing is it's a little bit like you've radio tagged a bunch of bears and then followed them around the forest for science. But instead of radio tags, it's cell phones and people's social interactions. And instead of bears, it's like millennials. And instead of tranquilizing them for science, you're showing them advertising. At least I hope you're not if your campaigns involve tranquilizing millennials for science, please don't tell us about it. We don't want to know. There's liability risks there. Similarly, you might have other triggers that might happen where, let's say I'm a car company and I want to sell minivans or like full family saloon cars, and I want to do it in shopping malls. But I don't always want the shopping mall. So I might say, okay, I want to use movie times as an event trigger. So give me first look at the shopping malls. And whenever a kid's movie is letting out for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to heavy up in that location. And afterwards, I don't necessarily need to buy it. And if you're the network owner, there might be a whole bunch of merchants in that mall. They're like, look, I'm always in this mall. I have a store. It's right there. It's downstairs. I just need to direct people downstairs. I'll be your last look. If you ever don't sell something, if you go to your auction and nobody wants it, I'll buy it for like 30 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar. You don't have to drop your drawers in the open auction. You don't need to erode your prices. And because no impression is a bad impression for me. My shoe store is always in this mall. So I will always buy whenever you got it, but I want to pay a really, really discounted rate. And all of a sudden you can do that. Similarly, other use cases like having transit people, there's some obvious ones like train schedules. So I want to buy in this train station, but not all the time. I only want when the business commuter trains are arriving, right? And all the business people are getting off in the morning, I want to get them. And then another company might say, an airline might say, I really want to get people, but only when the the Eurostar is coming in from Paris and there's a whole bunch of tourists on the weekend. That's when I need to get them. Or local restaurants might want to say that. So using these conditional triggers, you might have a share of voice condition, as Mungo was mentioning, or you might have completely different triggers that you might not understand as a publisher, but you don't need to as long as the advertiser does. And then you can stack these deals one on top of each other to try to wring the most value out of it. So that construct, that idea of stacking deals up to enable these new use cases and wring more value out of your inventory, we're going to be bringing forward a lot more tools over the course of the next year in order to help you do that. And that gives you hopefully a little bit of insight into our thinking. So, what have I covered today? First and foremost, open, I think is the thing you're going to hear from us the most. If we're going to bring the most value out of your inventory and out of this as a transaction vehicle, we need to start doing more open transactions. When you do an open transaction, when you're making an open deal, don't go into it like blind. Go through the exercise that Mungo was talking about to set a price, and then make that your floor, and then see, okay, there are going to be times when you sell it for floor price, and there are going to be times when the auction, somebody looks at it and says, oh, that's really valuable to me, I'll bid more. We are your auction house. It's not the stock market. There is this idea of private rooms, which is the only place that we're selling now, but there's also the auction hall, and it's by mixing them together and selling the right to have first look or second look or third look that you can start to extract more value from your existing inventory. That management process is called the waterfall, and the ability to trade trade security for price, the yield manager's dilemma. Waterfall management is something that everybody's programmatic team should be thinking about and talking about. That's the special sauce, and how you do that, that's where you as an organization, as a media owner organization, can really start to add value above and beyond just the value of your inventory, and where you can give salespeople wildly new things to sell. And that's the last point. Same stuff, same inventory, but your sales team all of a sudden can cook up any number of constructs to give people first look at a slice of inventory, second look, last look, to say, all right, you can have exclusive first look, or I have a bunch of inventory, and it's not going to the full open auction, but all of the sportswear companies, or anybody who cares a lot about weather, or anybody who cares a lot about sports scores, gets to look at this inventory first or second or third. And how much do you want to pay for that? Is it going to be a price premium on a CPM basis, or a guarantee? So I'm not going to charge you a price premium, but you have to guarantee you're going to give me $1 million, or €2 million, or 100,000 euro, or whatever makes sense to you. And that's that. Any questions? Okay, yeah, so the question was waterfall management, and will Broadsign and the industry move towards header bidding? We've actually seen some players elsewhere in the world already start to implement header bidding-like systems. I wouldn't preclude it. I think it's absolutely a likely thing to happen. So header bidding, you're basically running an auction in front of the auction to try to manage your yield better between your direct sales and your programmatic sales. Yeah, I could see that happen. Absolutely. Tim.
What would be a good way to get media owners? Hello. What would be a good way to get media owners past the? You've got the waterfall, but it's almost like upstream. You've got this massive dam that's called optioning.
Yeah, that's a great point. So people's ability to option inventory, and then how do you manage that? If you have the tools to be able to rebalance, like Mungo showed you, then there's an ability to get around it from a technical perspective. From a psychological perspective, of someone saying, well, why would I bother doing this if I can just option the inventory? Optioning the inventory is great, but you still have to go through the manual process to buy it. So some of those use cases, like the IBM one, even if I have the option, I still need the legion of monkeys on typewriters to be able to actually deliver it. So if all you're looking for is flexibility in a buy, then yeah, option. But if you're actually looking to deliver something that is a little more creative in its execution, not always, but sometimes, like the examples that I showed, programmatic and waterfall is going to be the best way to go after it. But I think option will still have a place. I don't see. Some people think like programmatic is this construct that's going to like replace everything. There won't be any more direct sales, and hey, there might not even be any salespeople, and it's all just going to be like robots talking to each other and money raining from the heavens. And I think that's just total garbage. You're still going to have the constructs that you had before. Some of them might be used less or in only specific use cases, and then you'll see new tools being used increasingly in other use cases. Does that answer roughly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? No. All right. Well, thanks, guys.